Now, we're still going forward here. We're talking about the two extremes. Now, I put capitalism on the board over here on the right because it tends to be associated with the political right. I put communism over here because this idea of having an economy that has a heart and actually cares for people, rather than being greedy old selfish people over here, tends to be on the political left. That it is possible to have a utopia as long as you don't allow people to be greedy with their stuff. And one way they can't be greedy is if they don't have any stuff to have any control over. Now, there are kissing cousins to capitalism, just like there's a kissing cousin to communism. Under communism, we said, who decides what's going to be planted on the 50 acres back there? Well, the Communist Party does. That's their job. They do that. And who tells the workers where they're going to work and how much they're going to get paid? Well, the Communist Party does. And who tells them what apartment they're going to live in and how much space they're going to have? Well, that's all allocated too. So everybody has the same amount, and some people aren't really, really rich while others are really, really poor because there's enough for everybody, and we allocate to make sure that it is fair. So when the government controls the land, the labor, owns all the tools and makes the entrepreneurial decisions, we're talking about a form of totalitarianism, which we call communism, which means commune means we all own it together, but somebody's got to be in charge about who does what when. Now, if we have something called market failure, which we talked about last time, where the market does not produce what the people in the economy really need, then the government's job is to go in there and fill the gap and produce the things that the free market's not producing. When the government goes into the business of entering the marketplace and competing in the marketplace by producing a good or service or services, we no longer have totalitarian communism. We have something which is the kissing cousin of that, which is called socialism. Socialism. When the government begins to actively participate in the production of goods and services in the economy. And we're talking about socialism. Now, socialism goes back a long way. With the Founding Fathers, they thought we ought to have a postal system that delivered the mail fairly and didn't make some people pay more for the mail than other people. So we still have that institution today. More recently, we're talking about the Affordable Care Act, nicknamed Obamacare. Why? Because some people can afford all these expensive medical procedures and other people can't, and that's not fair. Because it's not fair, then we need to change it, and the government needs to take control of that and control prices and control who can do what and how much physicians can be paid and all those sorts of things in the name of being fair, which leads us to a medical system that is more socialized. If we talk about our public school system, not homeschooling or private schooling, we're talking about a public school system, well then, in order to be fair, in order so all kids could have the same educational opportunities, it's only fair that the government takes over and so that all children have access to the same educational opportunities. And if you see where I'm going with that, that would be an application of this idea of socialism. Over here, you've got a kid, a child, I should say child. Now, if you're rich, you can give a tutor to them. If you're not, well, I guess they're not going to learn their ABCs. And over here, I guess that's your responsibility. Hopefully someone will be nice to you, or charitably, or you got relatives or something, because other than that, the government is not going to take care of you. It's not the government's job to make things fair. It's not the government's job to make your life nice. It's not the government's job to do any of that over here. Remember, it's steely-eyed and kind of you're on your own here. Now, I'm going to put a name with socialism. Now, this is not the typical name that goes with socialism, but I'm going to give it to you for an example. Adolf, as in Adolf Hitler. I'm putting his name beside socialism because we had an inventor, an entrepreneur in this country called Henry Ford, who believed that cars shouldn't be just for the rich, but it should be for the average, ordinary people. And so that means the price has got to get down. And so in order to get that price down, he borrowed some ideas from some other Henrys, like the assembly line and bringing the parts to the car rather than on an assembly line, etc., and keep the thing going, from Henry Olds and some other Henry, and it worked very well. And you could have a car that would get you around, and you could have it any color you wanted as long as it was black, And he put America on wheels. There would be no McDonald's unless we had an automobile. I'm sorry. Nobody's going to get in their horse and buggy and go a couple miles to go get a sandwich. No drive-in movies or anything like that. Put America on wheels. Changed our economy a lot. Now, there's a guy named Adolf Hitler over there in Germany where the roads are kind of narrow. That goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. And they didn't have an entrepreneur to come up with an inexpensive car for the people. There was a market failure in Germany to have what Mr. Ford did for Americans. So what's a government supposed to do if the free market didn't go in there and supply the need to give Germans good, cheap, inexpensive transportation? Well, the government's got to do it. So he created a car, what he called a people's car. And the word for people in German is Volk. And the word for car is Wagen. And he came up with a VW Beetle. It's still in production in Brazil. Can't be in here because of pollution controls, but it still works. So that would be a case of what class? Now the government is involved in the manufacture of automobiles because the free market isn't providing what the people need. Let's go with one more here. I'll go with one more ism. But I have to warn you, before I put this one on the board, you can write it down, but you don't ever want to call anybody by this name. If you do, they'll probably take a swing at you. They don't know what the word means, but they know it's a bad word, and you don't want to get poked in the nose. So just be careful how you use this word, all right? Fascism. Fascism. The name I'm going to put with that is a guy named Benito Mussolini, Hitler's friend for a while. So what's the difference between fascism, socialism, communism? Well, fascism is a kissing cousin to capitalism, just like socialism is a watered-down version of a totalitarian communism. So what was unique about fascism? Well, the first thing that was unique about fascism is that Mussolini looks over here at Stalin and he looks over here at Hitler and he goes, hey, the government's in control. I like it. I like to be in control of things. All government people like to do that. But they look over here and say, man, I don't want to be everybody's boss, and I don't want to run the whole thing. I don't even want to run parts of the economy. You run a car company, and you got to have purchasing, and you got to have payroll, and you got to have human relations, and you got to keep track of all this. That's work. That's a lot of work running a car company. I love the role, but I don't want to take on all that responsibility. So he looked over here to capitalism, at this thing that we said, private property. And he took this private property and he divided it into two parts. He divided it into two parts. If you, I saw that iPhone over there. If you own that iPhone, you possess it. Possession. And if it's yours, you also exercise control over that. So Mussolini, being on the political right, opposed to these people on the left, who likes private property because he knows if people own stuff, they're going to take care of their stuff. If they got salt in their car in the wintertime, they're going to go out there even though they're cold, and they're going to spray that salt over there, and they're going to change the oil in the car. They're going to do all that sort of stuff because it's their car. But if it's the government's car, I don't know, did you rent a car you know, in the wintertime, and do you always make sure that you get the salt off of it before you take it back into the rental place? Or do most people? No. Why? Because it's not my car, right? I know it's due for an oil change, but hey, I'm just renting the car. I'm not doing an oil change, right? Because it's not my car. Mussolini says, boy, when people have their own stuff, they really protect it, and they treat it well, and they make it work. And if they're out there and it's going to rain, boy, they'll go out there and they'll get that hay in. They'll sacrifice. They'll sweat. They are so productive when people own their own stuff. I want that. But I also want this control thing that these guys got. So why don't we do this? Why don't we allow people to keep their private property in terms of possession? They can keep possession of their car and their tractor and their land, but what we, the government, will do is we will take over control. Yeah, that's your cell phone. It's in your hand, but I get to tell you when you can use it and who you can call and when you can call. It's yours. I just get to tell you when and how often you can use it. Now that would be the first indicator of what? Yes, fascism. Thank you very much. Fascism. Now there are other elements of fascism, and another element of fascism would be a very strong nationalism. I could pick on our current president who likes to use the term exceptionalism, that it might be wrong for other countries to invade other countries, but we're the exception, and therefore we can invade countries that are bad, but we don't think other countries should go invade other bad countries because of American exceptionalism. He uses that term, exceptionalism, and that would be a form of we are different, we are special. I can't really say we're above the law. We make the law. We are in charge. And so one aspect of fascism is a very strong concept of what President Eisenhower warned us about, was the growth of the military-industrial complex, that the defense industries and the big corporations would combine with the interest of the government, and where the company stopped and the government began, it all becomes kind of the same thing, and you can't really figure out what they're doing because they're in this cloak of national security, and so they're part of national security, so there's nothing you can do about it, but they're in it together, and it's usually about warfare and war games and all those sorts of things, and it has to do with making sure that we make sure these communists stay out of here, and we'll take care of our own. And so we're exceptional. We have a militaristic bent, that we got to know what everybody's doing because we got to control everybody's stuff and what they do with their stuff. Now, with this thing with Edward Snowden and NSA, and right now they're debating in Congress whether or not we should be allowed to see the 28-page summary of what actually happened on 9/11. How long has it been? It's been a long time. We're still not allowed to know if it's national security, we're still not allowed to know, and so there's a big hullabaloo about whether they should release the 28 pages that no one's allowed to see except a congressman, and then they're going to swear on a stack of Bibles they won't say anything about it since they saw it. Wow, I don't understand that. Now, we're talking about a government that needs to know about everything in order to control the economy. So if I ask you, do we have a government that tends to go and expand this area of more and more and more control over our life, to the extent that we're capturing all these telephone conversations and all that sort of stuff because we got to know what you're doing, because one of you might be doing something bad and we got to get you before you do it, right? So if this is alive and growing in the economy, do we have any socialism in our economy as well? Yeah or no? Yeah. So what we have, do we have any free market where this is mine, I get to do what I want, I can plant whatever I want in my own garden, thank you. Well, almost. There are a couple weeds, if you get my direction, you're not allowed to put in your garden, but for the most part, we can plant whatever we want in our garden. So the economy we have is called a mixed economy. The economy we have is called a mixed economy. And if I was to ask you on a test, what is a mixture of? You would say it's a mixture of, number one ism is capitalism. Is it also a mixture of fascism? Is it also a partial mixture of socialism? Is it also a partial mixture of communism? Say no. Say no. Because communism is an all or nothing deal. It's kind of like being pregnant. You either is or you ain't, right? Communism, the government either owns it and controls all of it or it doesn't. So our mixed economy is a mixture of socialism and fascism and free market capitalism. The only thing that I left out, I'll just mention here briefly, is the social theory, and I'll close with this. The social theory behind the capitalism of people like Adam Smith is that personal greed is not a vice, but personal greed, wanting to get more and working hard to get it, as long as you don't violate the private property of somebody else. Personal greed is a virtue and not a vice. We might put a different name on, oh, he's very ambitious. Oh, he's a go-getter. She's a go-getter. We don't say they're greedy. But some people like Ayn Rand are willing to say, yeah, greed is a virtue. Selfishness is glorified and even deemed a public virtue because, in my opinion, the way I gave it here, as long as it is a win-win transaction, I say, hey, go to it. Hey, go knock them down, Tiger. I'm better off if there's more stuff in the world than less. On the socialist theory, which began in the 1800s with the Industrial Revolution, etc., is that, from a Karl Marx perspective, is that the free market, allowing people to do whatever they want with their own stuff, brings out the worst in people. It brings out their greed, from a socialist perspective. And a free market is chaotic. You all know that if you want to get something done, you got to plan it out. If you don't plan it out, if you just let things happen the way they are, you're not going to be as good at it as if you have a plan and you execute your plan. And the free market's chaos. And so we can't have a good economy that's chaotic, and therefore the government must plan it, or we're going to have chaos, is the socialist argument. The counter to that is, well, why should we have the government plan? Don't each individual have their own plan? Why don't we let each individual execute their own plan rather than have a plan that one size fits all? The next argument is that the only way to make people good and make them act like decent human beings is to pass a law. The only way that we can keep people from harming their family by going on a gambling binge or a drug binge is to pass a law. Now notice over here, under capitalism, if somebody wants to shoot themselves into oblivion, is that any of the government's business? No. If they want to go out in a blazing wild euphoria of artificial drugs, that's not the government's business. Now, is that the way the American people think today? Say no. No, we think that the government needs to protect people from themselves. People can be stupid, and we can't let them do these stupid things. Now, to that extent, we're not a free market capitalist country. So the only way we can get people to be good is to pass a law. Now, that is a socialist theory, not a free market theory. So when we pass a law, the more laws we pass, the more we're going to have to enforce them. And the more we enforce the law, the more social intimidation we have to have, the more coercion. And even if people absolutely refuse to obey these laws that's going to make them and us better, then the use of force will come into play. Which means we're going to force people to act right, whether they want to or not. And that's where we'll close this particular section of our lecture.